Welcome back to another recording of the Elevate Media Podcast. I'm Chris Anderson, your host, and today we're going to focus on ourselves. We're going to be a little selfish in this episode, so we're going to get to think about how we can improve ourselves as leaders in our organizations, our businesses, to help us get to those next levels, because, we're the captain of our ship, right? If we go down, the whole thing goes down, and we can only, succeed to the level as where we are as leaders in our organization. So excited to have an expert on the show today talking about just that. Adrian Kaler, welcome to the Elevate Media Podcast.
Great to be here, brother. Thanks for having me on. Really honored. I love your show.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're excited to have you on. And, we jump right into it here at the beginning. Your bio's out there. You've done amazing things, worked with some fantastic companies. So everyone make sure you check out Adrian on LinkedIn, and I'll let him share at the end where more places to find him. But yeah, just some big name companies out there, which is really cool. But, what got you into wanting to help people with leadership and organizations alike?
Well, I've always loved people. And I've always, I grew up, as we were talking before we went push record, I grew up in small town, Southern Illinois, and life was pretty simple. It was great. It was like I grew up in an episode of Friday Night Lights. It was fun. My dad was the football coach. I was the QB, the whole thing. And, I always had an itching for more and as much exposure and as many opportunities and people that I could be with. And as soon as I got into the complexity of outside of small town America, I was like, wow, life's pretty tough.
Yeah.
Life's pretty tough.
Yeah.
There's a lot to manage. And we're not, you're kind of on your own, or you can go talk to a therapist or something, or maybe you talk to a pastor, or maybe a mentor, something like that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I know I had a deep yearning growing up to can we have the real conversation, please?
Yeah.
Because there's there's so many elephants in this room, we can't even move around anymore. That's what it felt like in my house growing up. My parents are awesome. Both school teachers, salt of the earth folks, but it's we just didn't have language for experience and language for aspiration, and even in some parts of the country, maybe where you're from too, it's to be ambitious was to be evil.
Yeah.
To have to want something beyond what you've got, you were actually pegged as being ungrateful or being better than, or being highfalutin, maybe they would have called it, or something like that. Fancy or something like that. It's oh, city boy, something anyway. So I always wanted to get around people that were really smart. And I just know it just because this is how reality works, is that the more successful something is, the more complex it is.
Yeah.
And the people at the top always want it to be in its most simple form. So that means that we neglect a lot always, and we don't have language for or any training on how to navigate the complexity. So that became a deep passion of mine early. I was a medical student for a while, and ended up getting a nursing degree out of college, and worked in really high stress environments. And my brain could always do the science stuff easy, but it's the human stuff that I was really fascinated by. How do you help people navigate crisis and not lose themselves, or lose themselves because sometimes you need to, if you lose a child, of course. I worked in the pediatric world. If your kid dies, all that's coming is the break. You're supposed to break, and you need to, but then how do you reinvent yourself, resurrect, or start over? And there's not a lot of people that know how to do that with might and with courage, and that's the only way through. And some people don't come back from in moments like that. It's an extreme one, and I've got plenty of people in my life like that. But suffering is necessary in life, but we don't talk about it enough because it reminds us of death, and so we'll just keep on trying to keep up the status quo. So I was just always weird and into that. Can we just talk about it? It's messy, and we're all full of snakes, and we all hopefully have an intention and want to be a good person, and not everybody's like that, and we ought not be surprised when people are just doing what is natural for them. But if we're not aware of our own dark side, there's no way we can navigate this dark world. So it's always introspective. And then if you take full responsibility, then you're ahead of the crowd for sure. You can navigate in your room. So I just love that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool. And I think, we talked before on episodes of you got to know yourself, right? And that's where a lot of it starts. And then being able to, shift into, bringing that to the surface and talking about that, and actually having those conversations even with yourself, of
Yep.
okay, my weakness is here, or I struggle with this, or whatever it
Yep.
might be. And I think a lot of times because we get told not to, right? I think we don't,
Right.
like you said, we just don't have those conversations, so we think we're not allowed to, or when
Yep.
you do try, it gets kind of, stomped on.
Right.
So if someone's trying to figure that out, they're starting their business, they know there's gaps, they're trying to figure out what's off. Where do you kind of lead them to kind of uncover some of those for themselves, so they can start having those conversations internally and with them?
Well, we talk a lot in my business, take new ground around resiliency. And
Mhm.
so, you only become resilient when you come up against hard times.
Yeah.
And the first step is always around clarity.
Mm.
So when there's two people in a room and like say the business is struggling, there's two very different opinions on why it's struggling, usually. But the boss usually just kind of dictates what he or she thinks, and then the other person says or doesn't say what he or she thinks. And then so we're not aligned. So the first thing is to generate the amount of trust in the room where we can say what's really there for us. Let's put language on current reality and then explore it for a little bit and not get so scared. I mean, it's vulnerable to like not know something
Sure.
to our own minds, right? It's
Yeah.
safer to us if I'm right about it. And we're
Mhm.
prone to want to be right about it because we feel secure because now I know what's happening. But most of the time, people underestimate the what they're not seeing. They just can't see what they can't see. We call those blind spots. But I just don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Period. And that's a large majority. Like we know what we
Mhm.
don't know, and then we know what we know. That's called a Cartesian inquiry. That's how we build things, and that's how we solve problems in the world. I don't know how to fly a helicopter. I can go take a class, and I can fly a
Yeah.
helicopter. Aha, that's cool. That's cool. I don't know how to build a business plan. Now I can go online, take all these courses, and I can build a business plan. Wonderful. But what I don't know is a vast majority of what's going on between my ears, just based on the
Right.
neuroscience. I mean, we only know
Yeah.
between 2 and 4% of what's going on between our ears, period. We're only conscious of that much. So therefore, the chances of something else happening that I'm not aware of, but probably more honestly, I don't want to be aware of, because if I'm aware of it, then it's another problem that I either don't tell myself I don't have time to fix it, or I don't have the
Sure.
capacity, or how much of an idiot would I look like if I all these things that are all
Yeah.
egocentric, and all fear centric. There's just a lot that we don't want to know.
Right.
And if you're a business person and you've got issues, if you're running a business, you do have issues. If you think you don't have issues, that's your first issue. um right.
Yeah.
So you got to come in and say there's a lot of stuff here, and we'll take care of it over time, but we really need to fully understand it. People spend most of their time dealing with symptoms and not getting down to causal issues,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, it's about relationships. So
Mm.
if you're working by yourself, you're going to see parts of yourself you'd rather not see.
Yeah.
And uh if you have anybody in your team, and if you take the responsibility score really high, like everybody's really responsible, then your friends that you've hired, they're responsible for maybe a loss of whatever, $100,000, $1,000,000. That's a big deal. Now,
Yeah.
it's not the end of the world, but until we get there, we can't get anywhere new.
Yeah.
So my answer to your question is really around clarity. Like what are we really doing?
Mhm.
Not like what are we gesturing towards, but is there anything we're actually committed to, or are we just kind of
Right.
playing business?
Yeah.
Like something that we're actually going to sacrifice for, and we're actually going to put our relationships at stake for it. Right. So we're going
Mhm.
to get out of the friend zone and get into like, okay, we're partners here,
Right.
almost like a marriage,
Yeah.
um, and get this done. Now, where are all the breakdowns? Let's get
Yeah.
really honest about those.
Right.
And let's not label them like whose fault they are. Like fault is such a shallow conversation, but really look at it like, okay, this problem, how did I contribute to it? How did you contribute to it?
Yeah.
And let's just have a big, open, gracious conversation about it. Because if we don't get to contribution, we can't get to correction.
I like that. Yeah, that's a good point. And I like what you said, because I used to be an athletic trainer before
Ah, you
doing
look
any
like an
business
athletic
stuff.
trainer.
I appreciate that. Well, maybe I hope
Yeah.
that's.
Yeah. I played
um,
football in college, so I had trainers
okay.
all the time. It was
Yeah.
every day before practice, I get my ankles
Yep.
done. So
Yep.
I'm hanging out.
That's awesome. So, but like what you said of like we like to fix the superficial
Hmm.
Put a band-aid on the problem solution. That's what I always would tell athletes. And sometimes even like when because I have 2 little kids and I tell my wife, like a lot of times doctors are, no fault of themselves. Like we're just putting band-aids on things by giving pills or not
Yep.
really. So why are we having these issues?
Right.
And so I think it's the same thing with, leadership and with personal development. Like we can, write out our gratitudes or put a vision board on the wall, but unless we're into like the deeper issue of like, are we going to actually accomplish those,
Right.
like, and take action on that, nothing's going to change. And
Right.
so, I think so with that, like leading ourselves is hard for a lot of people, because they don't want to kind of open those doors and they don't want to,
Right.
and how you mentioned, like, you have to have that quote unquote native, that rough time, that hardship type
Sure.
thing, that obstacles away type
Yep.
moments. How should we approach those? Because they're going to happen. Life, business, just in
Sure.
general, you're going to have those moments where we're going to have to get around, through, or over an obstacle.
Right.
How do we do that without kind of just breaking completely and take it as a
Yeah.
positive?
Well, I mean, sometimes, how do I start with this? So there's a lot here. So
Yeah.
I'm a personal responsibility freak.
Mhm.
And so I guess in this way, I say that whatever is happening, I want it to happen.
Mm.
Now that's a really tough pill to swallow, and most
Yeah.
people won't and don't. I dare you not. I mean, it's fine not to. Whatever, go back to ignorance. But I say that if I believe that whatever's happening, I must want it to be happening because it's happening.
Yeah.
Otherwise, because you're a effective, assertive individual. I'm an effective, assertive individual. Anything in my life that I actually don't want, it's not here.
Yeah.
Right? I can say no to anything in my life, and pretty much it goes
Right.
away over time.
Yep.
I'm
Yeah.
speaking in hyperbole, but that's just to make the point. So, therefore, if I'm going through a hard time, I think the most powerful question is why do I like it this way?
Yeah.
Instead of how do I escape this? Whose fault is it? How do I look good in my own eyes? How do I
Yeah.
medicate myself so it's not so bad? No, do the opposite. Man, why did I want this struggle?
Mm.
Why did I
Mm.
want this? And there's always an answer to that question. You got to this is a dark I'm
Yeah.
not the guy people call for a pat on the back. I'm like more I'm the jumper cables guy.
Yeah.
So, but that's where we go is like, okay, if I can put my hand, oops, if I can put my hands around that
Yeah.
idea, that the thing I'm complaining about, I actually wanted, then I can pretty much handle anything
Mm.
because I'll be honest about it and I can get close to it. See, if it's my friend, it's not like in my
Yeah.
enemy. It's like the
Yeah.
situation's not if it's my enemy, I'm gonna stay away from it. But if it's my
Sure.
friend, if it's something I created, then I can get close to it and take a look at it and ask questions of it and
Mhm.
wonder about it. And I'll see parts of myself that I'm like, oh well, yeah, I was a chicken 3 months ago. I knew that I needed to fire this person and I was trying to people please or not trying to get my wife angry at me or blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, or he's my buddy from church or whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
And so to save myself, I'm now paying the price of $300,000. That's a
Yeah.
that's good for me to know that I pay that tax for my cowardice,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
if I can get close to that, and then don't even judge yourself about it. I mean, I've been through so much in my life, and I've made so many mistakes, and I've broken my heart 1,000 times, and people, whatever. It's just welcome to being, I think, a vital human.
Yeah.
If I can, so that's what I do first. First off, this is tough. Let's get
Yeah.
clear about how
Mm.
tough it is, and let's get clear about what I did to get us here. And then also be willing to have that conversation with others. Most of the time when a leader has some kind of confessional moment like that, they're the last one of the party.
Mm.
Other people have known for a long time.
Yeah.
And you've got a culture around you that you've created to not tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And people will say the opposite, but if nobody's challenging you, you don't want them to, and you've trained them not to. So it's time to like have a meeting of the mind saying, hey, how long have you known this was going to happen? And honest people, if you've got a team around you, honest people will tell you, hey, I remember I told you this, remember this, remember this, remember this. Okay, well, we need to renegotiate these relationships. because, let's not be here again. So in some
Right.
ways, a catchphrase for me is don't waste the suffering. Don't waste it, right? You
Mm.
don't just
Mm.
escape it. You gotta like get the most, squeeze it, like learn as much as you can, connect as much as you can. I mean, there's nothing like, I spend a lot of time in locker rooms, nothing like the brotherhood that can happen after a deep loss,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you just watch the game tape gruelingly and you're like, yep, I missed it. I missed it.
Yeah.
Nobody else. It's on me. If you put yourself on the hook that way.
Yeah.
But
I think
then
that extreme ownership with that, I think, is a huge, we
right on.
see Jocko out there talking about extreme ownership, but like, I
Yep.
think there's so much value to that.
Mhm.
And, like whatever it is in our life, like it's our fault, like
Yeah.
you're saying. Now, and I'm curious your opinion on this because I don't necessarily know how to respond to it. So if someone says, well, I got, someone stole my car or someone, mugged me. How is that my fault? How do I take responsibility? I would love for you. Can you have a kind of a conversation
Yeah.
around
I
those
mean,
type of
the
things?
way the way I'd handle that is like, of course, we're all like victimized at times, right?
Yeah.
We're all taken advantage of.
Yeah.
But I live in West Hollywood, California. If a homeless guy breaks into my house, I chose to live here.
It's true.
I'm no longer in Salem, Illinois. I mean, there's like, if I were to walk down the street, you'd see a bunch of crazy people. I
Yeah.
didn't get here by accident. So if
Right.
I'm like complaining about the traffic in LA, it's like I chose to live here. What?
Right.
I'm not late to the meeting because of the traffic. I'm late to the meeting because I didn't plan for the traffic.
Yep.
Period.
Yeah.
So but there are times in which, and we've all had this, I've had this where someone, took advantage of me or I was betrayed.
Mhm.
But if I'm honest, there's moments all along the way that I wasn't willing to pay the price of authenticity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean by that? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I've got one story coming up in my head, which I won't share, but I got betrayed by a mentor of mine.
Okay.
And, but what conversations was I unwilling? There was a lot that I was
Mhm.
that just maybe I wasn't clear about. And I
Yep.
just lived in this naive trust of this guy. And I didn't push all the way through. Then all of a sudden I was betrayed. This was when I was like 23 or something.
That's right.
Um, but it's like, so anytime we do, really authentically get taken advantage of, there's almost always some indications and
Yeah.
almost always some contribution, which most people avoid for the sake of looking good in their own eyes. And that's just a price. I'll pay that price every day. I'd rather be
Mhm.
real with myself. How did I blow it?
Yeah.
And then, because then you actually believe in your capacity to reinvent yourself. Like, we know this, that like shiny leaders are not that attractive to us. I mean, they're attractive. We just don't trust them.
Right.
People that can tell the truth on themselves quickly are so disarming. We almost don't know what to do with it. Like when you're around a leader that's like, hey, we missed the sales goals and here's what I did wrong. And I'm really sorry, guys. Here's what I'm going to do better. It's almost like, what? Because nobody talks like that.
Right.
Nobody like owns it,
Yeah.
clarifies it and makes a commitment moving forward.
Yeah.
Most people don't operate that way. So those are the
Yeah.
types of leaders we love working with, either in the big corporate space, which we've done and it's impressive and such, but our heart is always working with entrepreneurs because they're always much more scrappy.
Yeah. And I mean, you
And
have to be right starting out, the
oh
scrappiness
yeah,
and
you have
the
to be
resilience.
insane.
And and I think, you always hear the stat, like whatever it is, not even know what it is, but like barely any businesses ever survive. And I think that's more to the fact that in my eyes, at least, people, they can't deal with the discomfort long enough to
Right.
succeed. So they give up or they shift or things of
Yeah.
that. Do you think that's kind of the same thing or do you see it differently?
Yeah. Well, we've worked with tons of, there's very known patterns in the founder world.
Mm,
And we work with tons of founders. I spend most of my time coaching founders, and I've got smart guys that come and do the business consulting side of things. But most of my work is fierce advocacy work for the founder. And they almost, if they're successful, they get to a place where they've built a company and they don't want to run it anymore
mm,
because they don't want to be a CEO. They could have gone, they don't have the chops for it, literally, but they also don't want to go run meetings all day long. They're pioneers. And
yeah.
they're no longer pioneering. Now they're like taking care of the farm. I'm like, no, I don't want to take care of the farm. I want to go back out again. And therefore, because of that, paradox that they're in, or that tension they're in. They act squirrely and they treat people poorly because they have no business running a company. They are world class at starting a company, but running one is not of their interest. But they don't want to let go as well because it's their baby, right?
Right.
So, and then who do I trust? And all these dynamics, which are just natural and normal, but they don't have language for it, so they can't find themselves through. I mean, for us, we see language as like the kind of the handles on reality. If we can get
Mm.
language for something, then we can move it around. But if it's all vague and, my people are dumb or whatever their big generalistic,
Sure.
vague term is, that's not
Mhm.
helpful. Like,
Yeah.
who
Right.
isn't, like,
Right.
let's get specific.
Yep.
So, people, yeah, they are in those transition moments. And most of the time, I mean, we've bought into this "it's lonely at the top" story.
Mm.
Um, and it, in some ways it is, just because there's less people there.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be lonely. You just got to be more humble.
Yeah.
The world wants you to be perfect. It does, because it doesn't want any more trouble.
Right.
And, it's like your team wants you to have it all together, but you don't have it all together.
Right.
And we'll settle for hiding and blaming instead of having an open, big dialogue about how imperfect we are and how great that is.
Yeah.
And if you do that well, you generate a whole scene of camaraderie. It's like, we need each other. And that's a pretty vulnerable place to be in, because we're just here to get paid. No, maybe we're here to do life together.
Right.
And some people don't have that view of work. Some people have a view of work as very transactional, instead of like, oh, we're investing a huge portion of our life to working alongside of each other. How about we make it awesome?
Right. Yeah.
Let's say that's possible.
Yeah.
Instead of us, kind of having these superficial conversations or judging each other silently. Let's just open up the kimono and get real with one another. But that's,
Right.
that's a big gamble that most folks, based on their history or based on their patterns they've seen around them, they just don't know how to do, or are unwilling to do.
So how would someone start that? They want, maybe they haven't started that way with
Right.
their team, or even, themselves or the family. If maybe it's just them and their spouse, something, whoever they're
Mhm.
working close with, how can they take steps to start to build that kind of culture, or that kind of camaraderie of being open and sharing like that?
Yeah. Well, it's tough to see the water you're swimming in, first off.
Yeah.
Right? So, everybody, you're inside the culture and you created it if you
Mhm.
founded it. And especially if you're running, I used to work with tons of husband-wife combos.
Mm.
And so it's very muddled and it's high
Yeah.
stakes, right? Because everything's connected, and family life and intimacy
Yeah.
life and all that, and future and all that. So it's complicated. Excuse me. Um, so it's good to get an outside set of eyes. It is. That's why a lot of people hire us, because we can see things that they can't see.
Yeah.
And, to get somebody that knows this terrain, because the map is always different than the terrain. It always
Yeah.
sounds good. We could read all the John Maxwell books and all the Simon Sinek books, and this all sounds great, but it's
Yep.
not the way it is. Like when
Yep.
I'm in the room, in the meeting, and that's just distinct, right?
Yeah.
So, and those guys are both great, and I'm fans of both
Mhm.
of them.
Yep.
But you need to be able to look at reality from the bottom up, not from the top down.
Mm.
So, if you're trying to reset this culture, let me try not to be simplistic about it. At least most of the time, folks do this only when it's in significant breakdown,
Okay.
right? When things are cruising, yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. People
Right.
just love that viewpoint.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Right.
But usually then that means your issues are going to move from, you got a couple shit hors d'oeuvres around, but you don't want to eat those, and so those
Yeah.
become a shit sandwich. And eventually people call us when it's a shit buffet. It's like, this is bad.
Yeah.
But if you're not at that point yet, I mean, we analyze any kind of breakdown with okay, there's always something that's working. What's working here?
Mhm.
And there's probably a long list. I mean, especially if you're working with a spouse or even just a partner or whatever, based on the context being what we said we're committed to, annual goals for this year, where we'd be by whatever. Okay, good. So that's the bar. That helps everything make sense. Like some aim, you have to have an aim.
Yep.
Because then that sets up the hierarchy of concerns. That sets up all the meaning. Like, what does this mean now? Well, I
Right.
only know this in the context of what I say I'm committed to. And Jordan Peterson does brilliant stuff on all this. But get really clear on what the aim is. And if you're not willing to be clear on the aim, then you don't really have a business.
Mm,
You just have like a hobby and a thing you like doing. That's cool.
sure.
But you're
Yeah.
not going to like really grow. You might get lucky, but you're not going to really grow because you're not creating a mechanism by which to produce value for customers. You're doing it for yourself.
Right.
No big deal. That's cool.
Right. Yep.
There's lots of those. But you can't correct unless there's constraint, and an aim gives you constraint. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And it has
So
something you can, measure and have data and be
right
able to
on.
see, actually like, smart goals or specific
Right.
measurable, all that stuff. Same kind of
Any of
thing.
those work. Any of
Mhm.
those work. But it does,
Yeah.
it gives you a yardstick to look at reality
Yep.
from. And then from that is, okay, what are we doing now that's working? Make a
Mhm.
long list. Start there. What are we doing now that's not working? There's
Yeah.
probably maybe an equal list there. And then what's wanted and needed was the most important question to get us from where we are now to there. Now, people love to talk about strategy and tactics. That's cool.
Yeah.
And that's, helpful. It's just usually not where the problem is. Where the
Right.
problem is always relational, at least in our
Mhm.
view of things. But we're weird, right? So, I've got an old McKinsey, Stanford MBA guy, but he gets the fact that it's human beings. All the business problems are human problems,
Yeah.
not business mechanics. Yes, there
Mm.
are those, but if we have business mechanics problems, some human said it was okay,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
right? So
Exactly.
that we got to get to that thinking. How do we justify losing $1 million?
Mm.
And maybe we're too busy. That's a human question. Maybe
Yeah.
we're understaffed. That's a human question. Maybe we didn't want to fire Tom. That's a human question. But these are all human issues.
Yeah.
So I would say what's missing, having a conversation about what's working and not working in the relationships in the room.
Mhm.
And that's vulnerable. Once
Yeah.
again, that's why it's good to have an
Yeah.
outside person because I can step in and have that conversation easily and it's messy and it's beautiful. I think that's what's great about it.
Right.
But we're all scared to death that somebody's going to leave us and somebody's going to judge us and they're going to see the
Sure.
worst in us that we see in ourselves and all that kind of core human one-on-one stuff.
Yeah.
But if we can get past the horror of all that, then we've got a life, right? Then we got some
Yeah.
vitality, we got some possibility, we got some trust, we got some momentum.
Mhm.
And if you're working with a spouse, if you're not in a conversation about what you're, how good do we want to get? That's an important question. Do we want to run a mom and pop thing that fits our capacity? That's fair.
Sure.
Maybe we want to do that. Maybe we want to build a business that we can work together. That's the goal. Cool. Then don't study other companies because they're not doing the math like that.
Yeah.
They're finding the most talented people that can hit X results, but that's not what we've done. We want to hang out together and do something.
Yep.
Right now, and
Yeah.
I'm not a static personality theory guy. We can all grow
Sure.
as long as we're willing to be humble and learn a lot.
Yeah.
Probably in that order. Humility is the first most important thing.
Yeah. I like that. And yeah, I agree. I think again, you have to know where you want to go before you can build a plan to get there and
Right.
tweak and things along the way. Otherwise, you're just out there in the dark, hoping to
Right on. Well,
get something out.
there's natural tensions that exist that
Uh-huh.
we don't have language for.
Mm.
Like we use this assessment called the Harrison assessment. There's only 150 of us consultants in the US that get to use it. It's cool. One of the reasons, and I've taught them all. I've taught Strengths Finders and Myers-Briggs and DISC
Okay.
and blah, blah, blah,
Yep.
all that stuff. I don't teach any of those anymore. This is the only one I use because it lays out the leadership journey in all these paradoxes, which are
Mm.
like gravity, like they are happening if we decide
Okay.
to see them or
Yeah.
not. Like, for example, easy one to understand, like communication paradox. What's my
Okay.
preference for being frank? What's my preference for
Mm.
being diplomatic?
Yep.
Like saying things in a nice way, tactful way,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
being straightforward, direct and to the point. Everybody's on that grid somewhere on what your
Right.
preference is, right?
Yeah.
And if you're really frank and not very diplomatic, you're blunt.
Yep.
And if you're really diplomatic and not very frank, you're evasive. You don't tell
Mhm.
the truth all the time for the sake of relationship, you'd call it.
Mhm.
Um, and both of those are trouble. And
Yeah.
we ought to know where we are. And ironically, the evasive person under enough stress becomes blunt, right? Like,
Yeah.
because finally, I can't stand it. This guy's not listening to me. Now I got to tell him how it is. But
Yep.
that's at the end of a long road of not telling him the truth.
Right.
And
I
the
like
same way,
that.
if I'm really blunt and then I think the person's not listening, you know what? I'm just done talking. They're not listening.
Yeah. Yeah. I I
So
think be able to see it on the scale too, like in those real senses, because yeah, I think you're somewhere on
you're somewhere.
that line.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
always.
so yeah.
And there's 12 of those paradoxes. That's just
Okay.
the easy one to look at. But
Sure.
opinions and strategic
Okay.
acumen and risk, and there's 12 of those. So we use those a lot just to give people, once again, kind of a lay of the cultural land. Even if
Mhm.
there's two people, like they're not going to be aligned.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and when we can put these things together in a culture map, they laugh about it because it's so dang accurate. It's hilarious. Now, what to do about it takes obviously some humility and discipline and willingness to listen and willingness to be less superior, like we all are at some level. Like I'm right and they should learn or whatever. But if we become a curious culture and a learning culture, the sky's the limit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's like just on my journey, having to really adapt and change a little bit and learn, like you're saying,
Uh-huh.
on the communication portion, and not
Yep.
only just in business, but also marriage too. It's another place you have to learn it as well,
Yep.
and you know in business, learning a lot about myself, shortcomings, my strengths, things like that, and
Yep.
trying to build on those, or know where I just have to have someone to support where I'm not as good or where it's
Yeah.
not my strength. And
Right on, man.
um, it's been an interesting thing. And I just read a book by Dan Martell called Buy Back Your Time. And he
Uh-huh.
talks a little bit about that. You
A fan
know,
of Martell.
yeah, he's great, puts great content out there. And I really enjoyed that book just because I feel like I'm getting to that point where, we have a team and, trying to figure out like, do I want to delegate or bring someone on for certain activities that they'd be better at and enjoy versus, me just doing it because I need to.
Right.
And I'm like, I would say one of my strengths is saying like where I'm where I'm not good at something.
Sure.
And so it's just been to see like looking back when I started to now, like how the changes
Yeah.
happened in myself and things that you've had to overcome and learn again. Like you can't say that enough. I think you have to be able to learn and be humble and know you
Yeah.
don't know it all. Um,
Yeah.
so
Well, I worked with tons of solopreneurs when I first I've been coaching like 15 years now.
okay,
And, weird journey, healthcare stuff I talked about. Then I was a
mhm,
pastor for several years.
okay,
And then I ran a foundation and we worked in prison doing leadership trainings of murderers.
nice,
And then I started coaching people.
nice,
So fascinating world.
yeah,
But and I just grew organically. I didn't like pick a client. I knew a bunch of people, and I'm doing this now. And
that's awesome.
anyway, got into this whole solopreneur world, lots of creatives, filmmakers, photographers, that kind of thing. And some folks, if you're listening, you're very committed to the struggle. Like it's hard, and
Yeah,
you don't recognize or willing to own how much you love it to be hard, so you can look like a suffering
mm,
solopreneur. And
yeah,
to the point of like, should you hire people? Yeah, as long as they can create more value than you pay them.
yep,
That's a math problem.
yeah,
But it's also a cultural issue. Like, do they make the team better?
right,
Do they elevate the dialogue?
mhm,
Do they make the team more committed? So don't make exceptions when you're hiring people. Raise the bar super high. And
yeah,
if you can afford it, you can always fire them.
sure, yeah,
I always hired people with like, hey, we're gonna do this for 3 months, and then I'm gonna either
mm,
rehire you or let you go. That's how this is
yeah,
gonna work. And you
nice.
either
I like that.
blow my mind or we just won't work together. And I love you.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's the deal. I'm sacrificing so that it and I get better.
hmm,
With a lot more words than that, but it's like that's it because I hold myself to that standard.
right,
I've got an
yeah,
assistant. I've been working with her for I don't know 7, 8 years now. And when I hired her, I said, "Listen, I do want you to be perfect." It's true. Like, why? Because I hold myself when I'm scheduling stuff, like, I don't make a mistake when I'm scheduling stuff because I check it 3
yeah,
times.
hmm,
And so, you're not gonna be perfect, and that's also okay. But so the difference is, like, when you either knock it out of the park or when you blow it, you just gotta solve it so fast, I barely even notice it. That's your job.
right, yeah,
And if you blow it big, you just apologize profusely, and I'll forgive you as long as your heart's there, and then we'll get
yeah,
up and go again. But like, this is not lazy. We're not like getting sloppy here, and I'm not your
right,
buddy. Like we're
yeah,
working together. We're
yep,
partners. So that's all about the kind of ethos you want to build. And I think at any moment in time, especially this moment in time in our culture, we need the brave to stand up and have the real conversations, because everybody needs that. We all need great leadership around us, and we all need to follow very well. I love following my team. I love not being the boss in every arena. I love like being a student in some meetings and tell me about this. Oh, I don't even know what you're talking about. Accounting. I am not the accountant. I don't run the P&L. I don't. Because I got smart guys that do that much better, and I don't need to look like that guy either.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
there's probably a lot of people are listening are like, okay, I feel this way.
Yeah, I like
what
that.
do you?
And like that's kind of my mindset with it too. Like, and I can't remember now. I heard the story. I can't remember which president it is. Oh no, it was Henry Ford. I think he was being in front of his board. They were asking a bunch of questions or something, why he did certain things the way he did, or budget. I can't remember the exact story, so forgive me for listening. But basically, they were asking questions, and he said, "I don't know the answer." And they said, "Wait, Henry Ford, you're running this company, CEO, and you don't know the answer to whatever it was, finance question." He's like, "No." He's like, "You know why?" He's like, "Because I can pick up this phone, hit a button, and I can find out the answer from someone who's smarter than I am in that area."
Right on.
He's like, "Because I build a team where I don't have to know it all. I'm good at my thing." And that's what I love. And, as far as Elevate goes, like I've always been about, and it could be the incorrect way to do it, but I'm going to learn, I guess, is, our profit margins are smaller probably than other agencies, because I think I've built a team faster because I understood that more of like, I can only go so far by myself. And I'd rather have a team where I can, one, support them, help them, and then they're going to, teach me things as well along the way. And it's building that kind of community here within Elevate too, which is fun. So like,
it's awesome
balancing all that. Yeah. But learning how to do it well. And I think, I try to keep that humility piece and openness, because I know I'm far from perfect. But, for those listening, if they're, man, this has been a great episode. So again, Adrian, appreciate you sharing everything.
Happy to be here.
If they were to leave this episode and want to immediately go kind of work on their own internal conversation, what would be one question you'd have them ask themselves to go sit on?
Well, that's good. One question. I don't know if I can do one.
Okay, maybe a couple. Let me set this episode down and go look in the mirror and say,
let me do a two-parter.
Okay, yeah.
So, just because I think any self-reflection without feedback is vanity.
Okay.
We ought to be self-reflective, but we lie to ourselves so quickly. That's my point. It's like we all want to look good in our own eyes. I mean, even those of us that are humble or practice humility, and you do that obviously, and I want to do that as well in my life. It's just, you can't do surgery on yourself. So it's good to sit down and say, okay, good. What are the 3 things I did last year that I need to stop doing? And what are the 3 things I thought about doing that I need help doing? Even those 2 questions. But then I would also ask the people closest to you, and you probably need to put some context around it.
Yeah.
And, hey, I'm doing some self-reflection. I need you to help me get better. So please be unfiltered. I promise I won't punish you for your answers. Yeah. But what do you see? Right? And if they don't have an answer, you've trained them to be dumb. You've trained them to not think. Right? So, because they're smart people if they're around you. So if they don't have an answer, they say they need some time. Okay, but notice that's your impact. Like they either haven't been thinking about how to make you better, and that's what their job is, and how to make the company better, or they're scared. So either of those 2 things, that both are feedback. So I'd ask those questions. That's what I would do versus go to a mountaintop. Or if you want to, and I've got to hop on a coaching call here, but if you want to get some feedback, you were saying at the beginning, what do people do at the next step? We've got a 4-day personal leadership training called the Revenant Process. There's one in Boise. The next one's in Boise in March. It'll take your world. It's awesome. It's full of business leaders, but the conversation is very personal around your world and how you see the world, what you've made up about the world and yourself and your history and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like, 10 years of therapy in a weekend, and I'm not a therapy guy. but the breakthroughs are awesome. It's all
Cool.
Adlerian versus Freudian. If I had time, I'd go into it, but it's all future focused, that type of thinking, not kind of navel gazing, that kind of stuff. But
Okay. Yeah.
you're engaging, not like taking notes in a seminar. You're in it. We're inviting you to fully participate, take a bunch of risks. So people have huge breakthroughs.
That's
Of the
awesome.
last 2,000 people we just surveyed, 97% of them said it's one of the top 3 experiences of their life.
Okay. Awesome. And so people listen to this, if they want to get connected with you to find out more about that or get signed up, where's the best place for them to go?
You can go to takenewground.com, and then
Okay.
you can look under the public trainings. It's called the Revenant process.
Okay. Awesome. So and I'm sure you can get connected through Adrian on that website as well, guys. So
sure.
yeah,
You can find me on Instagram, Adrian, or at adrian.k. Love to connect with anybody here, anybody in your world, Chris. Very happy. So adrian.k on Instagram, or go to takenewground.com.
Awesome. Yeah, everyone take them up on that, get it checked out, get connected with them, start learning, start growing in your leadership.
You'd love it. You'd love it, brother.
Yeah. I'm definitely gonna check it out. That's for sure. I'm definitely gonna go check it out after this for sure, and make it work as long as I'm available that weekend. So
awesome.
But Adrian, again, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Yep. And everyone listen, make sure you share this with someone else who could benefit from it. We can do so much together by doing that. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, continue to go out there, elevate your life, elevate your brand, and we'll talk to you again soon.